All right, I didn't necessarily have the right clothes for Princess Poppy, so I'm borrowing a polka dotted blanket. Today, what we're looking at is continuing to understand our key concept. Sounds can travel through different materials. In your quiz that you took yesterday and reading that book, you understood that there are three types of materials that we're talking about. There is air, there's water, and there's ground. So with each of those, it's important to understand that the particles that make up those three materials are different. And specifically in the book, you should have seen some examples of how those particles were the same and how those particles were different. So check out some of these pictures and I'll talk you through some of the things that you should have noticed and hopefully wrote about on your quiz.
First, at the top, you have air particles. Then, in the middle, you have water particles. And finally, at the bottom, you have ground particles. These are air particles, and you can see that they have a lot of room to move around. These are water particles, and they are closer together, but can still move. Finally, we have ground particles, and these are very tightly pressed together. The air particles may be further apart, but as sound vibrates through, you will still see they are grouped in waves. With the water particles, they are tighter together, however, you can still see as sound travels, you get the waves. And even if the particles are tightly compacted, you can still see the waves as the sound travels through these particles.
Now what I wanted to do is I wanted to specifically make some sounds within the simulation and kind of talk about what we're noticing. So first off, again, all these things that you see here that are bouncing around are particles. Now the particles in this specific simulation are the air particles. You'll notice that unlike what you saw in the book between water particles and ground particles, these particles, being air particles, are much further apart and they're bouncing and moving all around. So when I play a cool sound like this, you will see the particles begin to vibrate and move. They're vibrating and moving in waves, and we've talked about how sound travels in waves, and you can see those particles are mimicking those waves. Those waves that we just saw had very short wavelengths. So we'll make it again. You can see those short wavelengths that are in between, whereas if I was to play a deeper instrument, like the double bass, you will notice that, very good, see just one massive wave is coming through there. Now, again, the particles keyword here is vibrate, and I want you to be able to put that word vibrate in your vocabulary, in your Unit 4 glossary, because that's a good word to know, and you'll see that on the upcoming slides. But that's what the particles are doing. They're vibrating, and because they're so far apart, it's actually much easier for sound to pass through. So when Poppy was to sing something like, "I see your true colors shining through," it would be much easier for you to hear me on the other side there because my sound is moving through the air particles. If I was to try to sing that through something a little bit harder, "I see your true colors shining through," again, those particles are much tightly compacted together. And while those particles will also vibrate like these particles, it's a little bit harder for the sound to be able to travel through. It still does. Think back to our Thor lesson and the magic of sound. It just doesn't travel in the same way, or with, in this case, the ability for you to be able to hear it very clearly. So that sound is a little different. With dolphins and being able to communicate through water, they're making these high-pitched, really loud noises, and that's what you're seeing through there. And I know right now you're trying to take me seriously wearing all of this stuff, and you're struggling, but that's okay. Hopefully that kind of cleared it up, and being able to see the simulation and that sound moving through those air particles helped.